Hello, everyone. My name is Catherine Brahic. I'm the environment editor at The Economist. And I'm delighted to invite up to the stage Will McCallum, who is co-executive director of Greenpeace UK, and Gustav Skarsgård. Gustav, why don't you come here? Actor, activists, why don't you sit in the middle?
Should I sit in the middle?
Yeah, absolutely. And Greenpeace's ocean ambassador. And for the next 20 minutes or so, we're going to change things up a little bit, talk about the power of activism, how to get the public engaged in issues around ocean health, and Will and Gustav's personal experience in trying to do this. And so just to start off, I wanted us to cast our minds back to the early months of 2020, when the world was becoming very wrapped up in the travels of a microorganism that had gone global. And meanwhile, our two panelists were in the end stages of some travels of their own. And so who wants to begin? Could you tell us a little bit about, Gustav, do you want to kick off?
Yeah,
what was
sure.
the journey? What were you doing? Where were you?
Well, first of all, ironically, we're here talking about finding your voice for the ocean, and I lost my voice. So. But yeah, I'll do my best. So at the beginning in January of 2020, I was invited by Greenpeace to join the last part of their globe-to-globe ocean campaign. And that took place
Pole to pole.
Pole to pole.
That would be impressive. Globe to globe would
globe
be
to
really
right, that would be
impressive.
some interstellar shit right there. So I was invited to join them to Antarctica. So we were out there for 2 weeks on their beautiful ship Arctic Sunrise, and yeah, it was incredible. A very inspiring, jaw-droppingly awesome experience yeah.
And this for you was the beginning of becoming an ocean ambassador for Greenpeace.
Yes.
So going to Antarctica sounds like a fantastic trip. I'm sure many of us in the room would love to do the same thing.
Yeah.
How does that help the cause? What was it that you were doing? Will, if you want to jump in, by the way, I know you were part of the wider trip as well.
Yeah, so we were really focused on the High Seas Treaty negotiations, which are happening right now in New York, and any of you who are talking to anyone in New York are probably hearing the same reports we are, which they're not really going that well. And this is often the case for ocean negotiations, that they sort of slip down the political priority list, not because politicians don't care about the oceans, not because they don't understand there's a problem, but just in the broader ecosystem of all the things they could care about, the oceans fall to the bottom. And so we came up with a plan to essentially raise the profile of the oceans, to talk about the fact that half of our planet has no way of protecting it, of protecting the biodiversity out there. And so we set off on a pole-to-pole expedition, starting in Svalbard, around Spitsbergen, finishing in the Antarctic. And we were joined in that time by 30 different research institutions. And really our goal was two things. One was showcase the incredible life out there worth protecting that people depend on, and talk truth to power to the vested interests who are threatening that biodiversity. And so every component of the expedition was in one way or another doing that. And Gustav was kind enough to join us for the Antarctic, which is one of the very few areas of international waters where you can protect, and yet governments haven't done so since 2016. Mm.
And part of the point, as I understand it, was that you were trying to show that MPAs need to be linked up, that actually there's a sort of network of biodiversity that links the entire ocean from pole to pole.
Exactly. So we teamed up with a few scientists, some of whom are here, to put together a map using Marksan of where the areas in the ocean, where are the areas in the high seas that we would like to see protected. And of course, I don't need telling most of the people in this room, there's no point in protecting somewhere where an animal breeds if you're not also protecting where it feeds. You need to protect, the oceans are connected through all kinds of different currents, through all kinds of different routes, and migratory species are the sort of heartbeat of the high seas.
And Gustav, you've got quite a different, I think, perspective on all of this to most of the people in the room, in that you're not an expert. You're not sort of drowning, as it were, in these issues every day. And so what struck you during this trip?
Well, I must say, personally, I was struck by the hopefulness of the activists on board. That's really what inspired me the most. I saw that because I came on, I wasn't that involved. Like, I'm trying to learn more and more as I go along about the issues, but I came on pretty green, no pun intended. But so what was really inspiring to me was to see the level of hopefulness I sensed within the activists, and that they were in the midst of doing something, acting for something they thoroughly believed in. And that was very inspiring to me. And since I got off the ship, I've noticed, like, the more I engage, the more hope I feel. So I feel like there's an equation there. When I've been in a, like, sort of egocentric creative process, like on a play or a movie or something, I'm in the tunnel vision on that project. I always come out of it and I feel like a bit jaded, a bit cynical about the state of the world and everything. And I feel like I need to engage to get that hope. So that's something I really learned in working with these activists on board.
And how do you feel like, what's the avenue for, because you're just one man.
Yeah.
What's the avenue for spreading that? What's the avenue for expanding?
Well, for me, there's like, I have to work on two fronts. Because one front is me as a human being, like trying to align my personal actions with the data I receive and my own personal outlook on the world. Right? That's my responsibility. That's my primary responsibility. And I will never be perfect, but I can start making that small transition myself. That's my main responsibility. And other than that, it's like, I have a platform. So if I have a platform, I have an Instagram account, and I have some followers, I can shed the light, I can point the light to something that seems reasonable to me. And to me, this seems reasonable. The work that Greenpeace are doing to protect the oceans, this seems reasonable to me. So I can just lend my platform to that. And it's not about me, right? So it's not about like virtue signaling, because I get, that's just embarrassing. It's not about that. It's just like, okay, this is something I believe in. Look to this. I can help shift the attention to something that I believe in.
And Will, do you want to jump in on that? Because we were talking last night about basically the fact that Greenpeace is not necessarily a natural bedfellow with some of the industries that are represented in this room. And so I'm curious what you feel is the point of these sorts of 3 days or big summits like this, if you feel like this is divorced from the reality out there, or the reality as you see it, or how do you feel you want to engage with these processes?
Yeah, we always weigh up, is it worth Greenpeace coming to an event where maybe we'll meet someone and spark a new idea, but it's not a decision-making forum. It's not a political forum where decisions are being made, and we tend to focus our energy there. But I wanted to come here with Gustav, especially because I think what Gustav's doing in terms of lending his platform is exactly the kind of thing we would be encouraging any business, any investor, any scientist to be thinking about, because the timescales for action are really quite tight, and the level of ambition we need is extremely high. And what that means is everyone has got to start working together a lot more. We're either going to get out of this mess as a movement, or we're going to lose as single organizations. And that's our message. And I'm lucky enough to have had some great experiences working alongside industry. I've certainly taken action on industry as well. But I'm very proud of the work we did with the krill industry in Antarctica, putting 4,000 square kilometers off limits to fishing through a collaboration with the krill industry and with scientists. Similarly, in the Barents Sea, we worked closely with McDonald's to put the area where the ice was melting off limits to the cod fishery up there. So we will happily work with people if they show that level of ambition and that level of urgency that we need. But aside from working directly with us, which I know isn't always appropriate and probably not desirable for some people, all I'd say is think about what that platform you have is. Not everyone has an Instagram with tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of followers, but there is a lot of power and network within this room. And look at the science, look at what it's telling us is needed in terms of timescales, and think about what bits of your network you can activate, what bits of your platform can be used to really send that message that we need urgent action now. It shouldn't be Greenpeace and the youth activists we work with, the indigenous activists we work with, even the few businesses we work with. It shouldn't just be our responsibility to be at these decision-making meetings in New York calling for ocean protection. Every single person in this room depends on a healthy ocean for the viability of their business. And that's something that we really want to start talking more seriously about. What does that mean for your business? What does that mean in terms of your role as an advocate?
Are you sticking around for the next couple of days?
I'll be here for the rest of today.
Is there an opportunity for the businesses in this room to actually engage with you?
Yeah.
Yeah. You mentioned youth activists, and activists, including youth activists, have had some good press and also some bad press recently. And I'm curious how you both feel as activists yourself about soup being thrown at paintings and people supergluing themselves to motorways. Is that making your job easier or harder? Gustav.
I don't know, the way I see it, in terms of action, there's 4 categories. You can do good for good reasons. You can do good for bad reasons. You can do bad for good reasons, or you can do bad for bad reasons, right? So throwing soup at a painting might be doing bad for good reasons.
Is it helpful?
Is it helpful?
Because the intentions are
I don't
good,
know.
but ultimately
I don't have the full data to pass a verdict on whether it's like a net positive or a net negative. Throwing soup at a painting, will it further polarize people? Will it be detrimental to the environmental movement? Will it inspire people? I don't have the data. For me, it's like, okay, I see that it's a good cause, but it's a bad move.
So it's not something you would do?
I wouldn't throw soup, no. I'm not a soup thrower.
Excellent. does it make your role easier or harder, or is it actually just kind of indifferent? It's just a different track entirely.
I don't know. I feel like, it's a matter of urgency, right? And acknowledging the urgency of the crisis we're in. And in a sense, I feel like it's more reasonable to act out in that way than to do nothing at all. And I think that conveys a message of urgency. It conveys a message of, okay, we're actually looking at the data we're receiving. We're looking at the state of things, environmentally on this planet, and we're taking action. So in a sense, I think that I would guess that it's a net positive in terms of protecting the world.
Will, you've been on this train for a very long time. What was your feeling about those types of actions? Does it make Greenpeace's job easier or harder?
I couldn't say whether it makes our job easier or harder. What I would say is, all I can think when I see actions like that is, partly, I've been there, I've done that. Maybe not as spectacular. I wish I'd done something that got as many people talking about climate change when I was 21. But as Gustav just said, it does feel reasonable. If you're 21 and you've grown up with the knowledge that the environment is falling to pieces and the people in power are doing nothing about it, I can see why that action makes sense. And I also often think about, well, what would we think of other civil rights movements? Now, I'm sure in the early 1900s, there wasn't a nice conference hall like this and we won't be mic'd up, but I'm certain there would have been people very similar to us having this exact debate about the actions of the suffragettes, who slashed paintings, who smashed windows, who stormed Parliament, ultimately to get the vote for women. And we have to look at climate change as one of these big historical moments, and ocean protection and protection of our environment as one of these big historical moments that takes a broad church of different actors using whatever platform they have. And I look at those 21-year-olds and I think, you're using that platform.
So in favor?
In favor, yeah.
I'm actually kind of curious. The room is very dark from where I'm sitting, but could I see a show of hands of who in the room is in favor of
throwing soup at painting?
Basically, extreme activism. And let's see how many are against and see if this all tallies. So actually, it's about 50-50. And there's an in-between, I'm being told at the front. Who's in between? The fence sitters. Ooh, quite a few fence sitters. Okay.
I think we're at 60 to 40.
Did you do a quick...
Yeah. Well,
60-40, but there are three
I'm
categories.
definitely not here for my math skills, but so I might be biased. Yeah.
We're about to run short on time, and I'd like to see if there's any questions for you from the room. But I sometimes feel like we hit this turning point in climate activism, where there's been a lot of grumbling and mumbling and shouting and screaming for decades, and then in the last 10 years, we've seen a real shift. And I attribute this to a generational change. I attribute it to the next generation growing up with climate change as a fact, not a question, voting, spending money, working. I don't see the same thing in ocean activism, and of course the two are linked. But I'm curious as to whether you see a difference and whether it matters.
I think a lot of this depends on where you're based and where you live, and the young activists who I've worked with who have joined our delegation at the United Nations, they're not drawing that distinction between ocean activism and climate activism. So Khairia, amazing young woman from Thailand who is fighting to save her local coastline from industrialization, she would consider herself a climate activist, but the form that takes is about saving her place. So likewise, Sharma Sanduya, who we worked with on the underwater climate strike from Mauritius, she would consider ocean activism and climate activism as one, because the manifestation of climate change in the Mauritius is ocean, it's the ocean dynamics, extreme weather events, the disappearance of biodiversity. So drawing the distinction between the two, I think, depends a little bit where you're from. But equally, I would agree. I think the oceans are out of mind, out of sight for vast numbers of people. At least half the planet don't live near the ocean. And for them, it's our responsibility to bring that story into their living rooms, to bring that story onto their phones, to tell them why it's important to care. But also, if they're more interested in climate activism, ultimately, I do think change isn't linear. We're not sort of waiting for some action on ocean, then some action on climate, then some action on ocean again. It's not going to happen in that way. I think what we need is that step change of decision makers realizing that every decision they're making needs to be about keeping our planet habitable, needs to be about keeping our planet equitable. And ocean decisions, climate decisions, we don't need to draw the distinction between the two so much.
Gustav, what drew you to the oceans as opposed to any other cause that you could have joined?
Well, I don't know, for some reason, as an actor, I've found myself in sort of the seafaring bracket.
Look up the Vikings, everybody.
Yeah, I've crossed the Pacific Ocean, fictionally this is. I crossed the Pacific Ocean on a balsa wood raft in Kon-Tiki. I've raided most of Europe in my self-made Viking boats in Vikings. I've emigrated to America. So I always find myself on a ship in the ocean somewhere. That and the fact that I just love being on the ocean. I love being in the ocean. I love free diving. I love snorkeling. And I come from a lineage of sailors on both my mother's and father's side. So I just feel like naturally drawn to the ocean.
Do you feel like there's something different about the ocean? You were saying something at dinner last night that struck me, which I can just repeat verbatim.
Well, I don't know, but I think that there's something mystical about the ocean in that we don't have the full knowledge about it. You know, it's like sort of the last frontier. And I also think that, it provides us with a new opportunity of choosing who we want to be in approaching this new area, right? Are we going to go about it business as usual as we always have? Okay, another area, another frontier to extract, or should we use this opportunity to update our modus operandi to where we're at today, 2023? How do we go about approaching this new frontier?
So an opportunity to change and to do things differently. Are there any questions from the room? Do we have a mic? We've got -1 minute, but one quick question from the front right here and maybe one over there.
Good afternoon. My name is Gail Davis. I do a lot of work at the UN. I have a question for all three of you, actually, as well as the moderator. When we talk about, we have to be careful because we tend to trend everything. Climate is looked at as a trend when it's a real reality. I work with women fisheries over in Fiji and other places. What can we do to have people understand that the oceans are right in your living room? It is not, even if I'm from New York, New Jersey area, it's right in your living room without going overboard or throwing something at art, because I deal with art too. So what can we do to have people understand? Because that's where your water comes from. That's where everything comes from. And we're right now dealing with beyond national jurisdiction over at the UN, the BB&J, which is essential. So how do we do that without going to extremes and having this be another trendy thing that we're doing because we dealt with agriculture? Let's go into oceans and make that a trend. This is real stuff. That's my question to the three of you.
My answer, personally, is through my job. I write stories, and I think, in fact, there's probably a link here. Mine are non-fiction, yours are fictional, but there is something about the power of storytelling. But I'm not here to answer questions, so Gustav and Will.
No, I think you raised a good point about water in general, maybe. Maybe that, I'm just speculating here, but maybe that's something that we could put focus on. You know, we learn in school about the cycle of the water and the ocean and the rain and the groundwater and everything. Maybe there's something to explore there in terms of storytelling and narrative, that the ocean is not something, again, separate from us, which I think is the root cause of most of our problems now, is the separation between us and nature, right? So I think that to reconnect with that, with water. I saw this great documentary, Our Universe, on Netflix now, and they told the story of how the water came here. It was pushed here by asteroids from Jupiter, and it arrived here. It didn't even evolve here. It was a blessing from the universe, and it's our responsibility to take care of it, I guess. That's a narrative.
And I think I'd say storytelling as well, and that's always what we're trying to do, whether that's working with scientists who, many of whom feel quite nervous in front of a camera, and training them and working with them to talk more about their research in an accessible way, whether it's working with actors and musicians who have entirely different audiences, or whether it's trying out new channels. We took TikTok with us to the Arctic for the Great Northerly Climate Strike, the most northern ever climate strike, with an activist called Maya Rose Craig on an iceberg. And Dewey and TikTok were with us. So we're always investing in new channels to try, as you say, to get it. I do think as well, meeting people where they're at. And for me, that's where plastics has always been a really powerful campaigning tool. Not because plastics is something that, I'm trying to think what I say. Not because plastics is the only issue facing the ocean, but it's the thing that is in people's kitchens. It's the thing that's in people's living room, and it's the thing that they see on nature documentaries as having an impact. So start with plastic, and where do you take people from there?
I think I'm going to apologize. Perhaps you could ask your questions in person, but we have run over time. Gustav and Will, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for telling us about your activism.